Hello, and thank you for joining us for our last and final conversation on improving the care of residents with dementia. Again, my name is Barbara Speedling, and it has been my pleasure to be your host for these conversations. Today, we're going to be talking about the aspect of this training that is most near and dear to my heart, and that is about the environment of care that we create for the people that we are providing services to. In the case of someone with dementia, I think that it's important to always remember that you can shape the environment to appear the way you want it to these people. And I like this quote from Eleanor Roosevelt because I think it really gets to the heart of what quality of life is all about. That if you can't live life to the fullest, to experience it, to experience new things and always have experiences right up until the end, then what's the point? And that's where therapeutic activity really comes in and where I think we misunderstand it a lot of times. It's not just that circle of people all listening to the same music, but it's about connection. And I think having started my career in therapeutic activity, I can tell you that residents often talk to the staff in that discipline differently than even they talk to social work or to nursing. I find that because we don't necessarily represent anything specific except having you have a better day, a lot of times people see the activity staff as friends as opposed to, say, people who work there. Not that we should cross a line and compromise our professionalism, but we need to make sure that people know that we're there to care for them and that we genuinely are concerned about their well-being, and the things that we do for them are an effort to maybe definitely help them to live their best life. So how well do we structure the relationships? Now, I've heard you talk a lot about your memory care environment. It sounds like you have a very sensitive and well-educated staff, that you have standardized approaches and so on, but there are always going to be human things that get in our way, like roommates, like personalities, and just somebody who maybe is grieving to the point that no matter what you've tried to do for them, they're not satisfied. And that's something you should talk about. That grief often shows itself as dissatisfaction, as anger, as belligerence, sarcasm, and not to overlook the fact that trauma and grief is really paramount in people who are losing themselves. Nothing makes sense anymore to a lot of these people, not even who they are. They don't know that person in the mirror anymore. I've had residents with dementia ask me where they are. They're looking for themselves. Have you seen Mary? As Mary's asking me. So it's important to look at those relationships. And we were talking a little bit earlier before we started the recording, and I said, we've come a far way from hugging people or showing that kind of affection. And so I know you have care plans that speak specifically to those kinds of things, but know that we shouldn't overlook it as a way of calming someone, as a way of making someone feel familiar and safe. Remembering that both the trauma-informed thinking and Maslow's hierarchy share that idea that you have to be safe and comfortable and trusting in order to really reach your best potential. So how is the relationship that you have with each other? Is your family dysfunctional? Do you have office politics and personality issues and leadership concerns? If you have those things, it's standing in your way of creating an environment that's comfortable for everybody. So my best advice would be to resolve those things. Oftentimes we get so caught up in the environments that we work in that we forget that we're only there for a short period of time each day. We don't have to live there, but the other people do. The residents do have to live there. And so our priority should be in making that environment as comfortable, as safe, as enjoyable as it can be for them. And in doing that, we'll probably do it for ourselves too. Quiet the environment, be more pleasant, learn how to resolve your grievances like adults. It is hard to go to the other person and say, you know what, I don't like what you did. But there's a way to do it that can maybe de-escalate the feelings that you might have when someone's trying to tell you something that was disturbing to them. So practice these things, have a way of resolving grievances, teach people a kind of language to be able to say, there's something I have to say to you. And I hope you'll accept it in the spirit that it's offered. I want to resolve this. We can't have this wedge between us if we're going to work cooperatively together or successfully together. Sometimes you need a moderator, someone to speak between you, but sometimes we should just sit down and say, look, this is silly. And we are cliquish and we do exclude people from the lunch table. And I see these things. And that is kind of immature too. Not that we have to socialize with everybody or be friends with everybody, but we should show a type of maturity and tolerance. We also have to recognize that dementia increases the loneliness equation. It's hard to implode. It's hard to disappear inside yourself. So you don't make conversation easily. You don't make friends easily. You don't know where you are. You don't really understand what's going on. And many things cause problems. You did something, you said something, you don't know why they got upset because you don't know what you did. There's so much that can cause someone with dementia to become more isolated, staying away from people, maybe not being able to, tolerate being around people or the overstimulation. So it's important for us to look at these factors of the dementia, to know that sometimes we have to think better about the way we're doing something. It isn't always a good idea to commingle everybody in the same room and watch them. That could trigger somebody who's got, another dual diagnosis with paranoia, say, or some other type of mental health issue. Watching them all day could just exacerbate their reactions to things. So during COVID, residents told us in this survey that they did that, not having that productive relationship, being able to be busy, seeing their friends was really the biggest part of the pandemic, excuse me, excuse me, the pandemic stress for them was not being able to have that same daily routine that they always did, much like the rest of us. They didn't like that interruption. They didn't like not being able to, socialize and go see their friends. And it did make them sad. And they did get angry about it. And they want to go back now to what they consider as normal. But in a lot of the places that I go, I find that we've deteriorated in creating that normal structure again. Many facilities are, void of activity personnel that are going to be sufficient to carry out that kind of, programming for people. I find that one-on-one visits are really void of any substance. So it's important for us to look at what is normal for this population and to start asking them. They say that without this, that freedom to move around, to relate to others, to be social is what they value as a human being. So we've got to really revisit that socialness at every level. How many opportunities do we offer people in a day to get to know each other? Many residents I interviewed tell me that they don't know anyone. They see these other people, but they don't know them, and nobody helps them to know them. So little things like writing my name in big letters and putting it on a tinted card in front of my plate at the dining table. Maybe the person across from me or the other people at the table will see my name and call it out, Barbara, and I'll say yes. And maybe naturally we'll start a conversation. But if you don't know my name, you're not going to recognize that maybe we could talk to each other. Lots of things that we could do. So the changing demographics are going to challenge us even more now. We see a great, increase in younger populations. Certainly here in New York, here on the East Coast, we're seeing a bigger mix of ethnic and, religious and language issues and all kinds of things that we consider culture. But remember what I said to you, culture is really about the way we're socialized as people. And as people across many languages and countries and religions, we really want the same basic things out of life. Good health, good family, love and safety. We want the same things. So we're very similar, no matter where we come from and what our makeup is all about. And now you got the baby boomers, people like me, people who are well informed, people who may have money to pay for what they want instead of having to take what they get, and who've lived a very different lifestyle than the people who preceded them. Growing up in the 1960s and 70s, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, that was the lifestyle, free everything. Free with yourself, hitchhiking, going to college, but, not really going for the education, going for everything else, and being a part of the political scene and being free, with so many aspects of our lives. And everything began to change then. The culture began to change. People got divorced and more frequently when they never did. People tried marijuana who never did. People, were doing other kinds of things, open marriages and all kinds of things that they never did before. And so the world changed forever behind civil rights and women's rights and assassinations and, the Beatles and all kinds of things changed our culture forever. So cultural competency for going forward for the next generation and the generations that follow is going to challenge us to really step back and say, well, Generation Z and the baby boomers are worlds apart in the kinds of things they like and the kinds of music and their use of technology and everything. But there are still commonalities. So cultural competency is about being able to care for, talk to, interact with anybody and do it successfully. So it's really important that you talk to your staff. And now we're going to look at the new regulations for activities that have gone from, surveys about leisure and men's focused activities and things of that nature to really looking at behavioral health and really looking at those non-pharmacological interventions that we are really challenged to come up with and to practice more frequently than we look for the medication. So each one of these regulatory statements tells us about a different type of behavioral challenge. So in this case, it's for someone who needs less stimulation, a quieter environment, less people. So they talk about the things that they would like to see. This is where this occupational, task activity comes in. This kind of quiet thing that I just do by myself. Maybe this is also where we use a listening station or headphones and, quiet distraction that way. Getting people up and getting them moving more, expending that, nervous energy, that motor agitation that accompanies a lot of different types of dementia. People who are restless and rocking and wanting to walk and saying, mother, mother, mother. All of those people need more physicalness. They need to move more. Maybe drumming activities. They say rhythm is very important, for people with dementia. It really helps them to calm down, something about the rhythm. So it's important, again, for all of us to understand what these things are about. When there's rummaging involved, well, then that's another type of motor agitation to be satisfied. Make a rummaging place where I can go do it appropriately, or engage me in doing simple domestic kinds of things. And cue the environment so I can navigate more easily. How can I find the bathroom, the dining room? In one facility that I worked in, we found these vinyl, appliques of food, and we put them on the hallway wall leading to the dining room. So we just said, follow the food, and that's how you're going to find the dining room. Lots of things that we could do to make the environment more user-friendly. Social groups don't form just because we all live in the same place. I lived in a dormitory for the first 2 years of college, and I didn't like everybody on my floor. So we can't just assume that because we're all stuck here, that we're going to be friends. And if we do that, it's going to be to our own demise because we're going to start to overlook those irritants, one resident to another, that are going to later develop into other kinds of things, like putting someone who is in an earlier stage of dementia with someone who is far progressed and touching their things, or trying to crawl into bed with the more, able person or the more capable person. That's just going to start problems. And as recent as a couple of months ago, we've seen a murder occur in an environment like this, where one woman with dementia beat her roommate to death with the foot pedal of her wheelchair. So you can't take these things lightly. You've got to look at socialness, and to prevent abuse, you really have to look at all of these considerations, Make sure you pick up on those small things that are just festering. When one resident with dementia points someone else out and says, look what she's doing. Look at her over there. Look at her. When people start, focusing on other residents, when they start really, singling somebody out, that's what we mean by willful behavior. So even if I am really demented, but I'm focused on somebody else, I can be willful in looking at them. So we should be trying to engage people more, bring them together. One of the things I love to do is bring together people who have the same occupation, seat them all together at mealtime, introduce them to each other, put items on the table that remind them of the occupation that they all share, and then get them started in conversation. A lot of times you can walk away then. The people who are more vocal will keep the conversation moving, and those people who are trying to keep, track of the conversation will at least recognize language that's common and familiar to them, and maybe be able to stay engaged for a period of time. So helping them to find their commonalities, looking at ways of doing more social talking kinds of things, like even eating and talking together, sharing something, cup of coffee and a donut, things of that nature. It's doing normal kinds of things that bring people together socially in the best kind of way. And when I ask people what they do most often with their friends, is what they tell me. They eat and they talk. They eat and they talk and they drink. They eat and they talk and they watch a movie. They eat and they talk and they go shopping. But they're always eating and talking. It becomes part of the social fabric. So I think that in some instances, residents will be more independent at the meal if a staff member or two sit at the table and eat with them. When we take people on field trips who have dementia, that's what happens in the restaurant. When it becomes more normal and they can watch what everybody else is doing and model it, then they can feed themselves. Or maybe it's on us to stop trying to get them to eat with those utensils and really increase the variety of finger foods that we have, not just sandwiches. That gets boring. But in today's world, I know you'd probably invest a little bit more, but wouldn't it be satisfying? Food is the last domain of pleasure. So you could have pizza rolls on days they have regular pizza. You could have, chicken nuggets and tater tots instead of, mashed potato, whatever it is. You could really make a whole finger food menu that could be interesting and satisfying. Studies like this tell us that just talking to people is probably the most beneficial thing you could do. That's why that challenge of giving everybody in your building 15 minutes a day to talk to 3 different residents for 5 minutes. See what happens. Try it. Ask them to do it for a couple of days and tell you how many residents they spoke to and what they learned about them. And make sure we don't all talk to the same resident. Most staff I meet in today's world have a favorite or two. So tell them just to go interview their favorite residents and find out what they can about them. We also need to teach more life skills, even if we don't think you'll retain the information. There is some phenomenon to short-term memory. People remember faces, they remember circumstances, they recognize kindness. So take a look at some of the things that you could do to help people. When they're upset, find a way to help them to calm themselves down. Say, come on now, let's sing that song you like. Don't worry about what's happening. Let's sing that song. Focus on that. But then you have to know the song. So when the person is developing the care plan, make sure you're specific. What song is it? And where do I find it? And how do I do it? Those are important. Help people make simple decisions rather than asking them, just verbally what they want for lunch. Have a book of food. Have your alert and oriented residents make some books of food. Have it match your menu cycle. And then say, look what we're having today. We're having beef stew. That's what this is. Or we're having fried chicken. Which one would you like? By looking at the picture, that person's going to be able to make a decision more easily. And if you help them, they're going to be not shy to try and make that decision again. So all kinds of things, even when people are upset, refusing care, maybe their judgment is off, but maybe you can talk to them about solving the problem and saying, well, can you tell me what I could do to make it easier for you? Always taking that time to turn it onto yourself and use those I statements. I would feel better if I knew what I could do to help you. Talking to people is important. Using our procedural memory, tying my shoes, tying a bow, buttoning a shirt, giving me something to do that I can do without really thinking about it, but I can do successfully. If you give me a box of shirts that are all unbuttoned and you say, oh, look, could you just button these for me? And you show me once, I can probably do it because my brain already knows how to do it. It's like breathing and other things that we learn, just because we are. So if it's in your memory to do it, or let's say you worked in a factory and there was a certain motion that people replicate, or sometimes I see people who were cleaning, they like to clean, they'll take their clothing and try to wipe the table. Whatever you see that I'm doing naturally, try to make an activity that satisfies that motion that you see. Also using music carefully, using music to touch memory. I often think of the song Smoke on the Water. All I need are the first 3 notes, bam, 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 and it's 1973. I'm at an outdoor rock concert in Cleveland, Ohio that I wasn't allowed to go to. My girlfriend and I hitchhiked to get there. We didn't have any money, so we climbed the fence. We got arrested, and I got grounded for the rest of the summer. So music and memory can be very powerful. It can bring back something so vivid. And if it's a good memory, it can be a wonderful thing. And sometimes even if it's a hard memory, it can be okay too. Crying can be cathartic. Feeling that pain of sorrow, losing someone, remembering something that once was. All of those things can be helpful too. But we can also bring language forward and other kinds of things by using music therapeutically. Other non-pharm interventions, certainly more movement, looking at boredom, looking at pain and sleep, and definitely using those things that we would do for ourselves, like a nice back rub or a cool compress on our forehead, or, just a nice hug or holding my hand. Certainly making food, that last domain of pleasure, something to look forward to. I believe we shared in the last session that, it'd be great to have other disciplines outside of nursing come that hour before the trucks even arrive and set that dining room up, wash people's hands and put their aprons out for them and do things like that. So nursing gets an opportunity, to finish the things they need to do before they have to serve the meal. And other staff get to know the residents in ways that perhaps they didn't know them before. Maybe they have a better understanding afterward of what nursing staff really have to, accomplish in a day, or what kinds of things are challenging to them. If you don't work in a direct care way, you don't often understand why it's so difficult. or why the burnout levels or the stress levels are so high. If you never come out and you never see real care being executed or don't take part in it, well, then, you're not going to have that same understanding. Coming back to music, so important to get people vocalizing, getting involved in it, using the entire brain. When we talk, we use one side. When we listen to music, we use the other. So let's bring them together. In these studies, they found that after people sang along with the music, they were much more alert at the end of the session than they were when they were passive listeners. So make sure you understand that using my language, getting me to talk, answer questions, all of those kinds of things, even humming, can keep me in the moment in ways that other things won't. So important. Here's the sheltered workshop that we spoke about. This is just about task activity. Occupationally based things are great. The lady who was a seamstress will sort buttons for you. The lady who was a banker will count coins or roll them or count money. The baker will portion out all the flour that we need to make all the loaves of bread. It doesn't matter that he's not going to actually bake it. It's okay because he has to prep and he knows that. So getting him involved in that every day is wonderful. The farmer, all kinds of things he could do, pick out seeds from a catalog, start the seedlings for the spring, work in the outdoor garden, whatever it was. But those are things that are going to stay in my memory the longest, what I did for work, because that's usually the part of our lives that we do spend the most time in. Journaling can be very helpful too for people with dementia, for anybody really, to hold on to their memories, to keep the pleasant things, current. And in dementia, especially when the person doesn't have those memories anymore, you have them. And you can help bring them forward by talking about the things that were written down in my journal. Learning names, learning circumstances, relationships, important, and keeping the dialogue going. We should never stop talking to people, even if we think they don't understand. Someday, somewhere in that conversation, they're going to respond. I think about Anne, who used to come in and sit down next to my office and, sit down next to my desk in my office and not say a word for months. And one day I turned and she was holding this beautiful glass paperweight that I had on my desk. And I said, "Oh, Anne." And she said, "What?" And she flopped it from hand to hand. She said, "What? Don't break it like this." And was in the moment with me for that very moment. So, language is important, using that language. I like this. This is put out by the Alzheimer's Association. You can find it if you just Google it online. But printing this out and giving copies to everyone, even other residents, reminds us of how many things in a day we could do that constitute an activity. And if we can string them all together, we'll have a very busy day of doing things that are satisfying and diverting our attention from the boredom, from the misery we might be feeling in other ways, and certainly give us the pride and the ego boost of being able to accomplish something. Something as simple as separating, two colors of plastic spoons and doing it successfully. Those are the things that help people to feel better about their life, to create an environment where they can really thrive. Remember, in my dementia, I am slipping away minute by minute, day by day. My life is just fading away. And the only way we're going to hang on to it is to do those things in the environment that keep us calm, that keep us feeling good about ourselves and about where we are, that make us feel like we belong, that challenge us for the skills that we still have back. And maybe we can even learn to hold on to some of those skills, like our language, like our ADL participation, like our meal participation. There are so many things that we could do if we would stop looking at activity as entertainment and look at activity as a way to thrive, a way to maintain all the skills that we need to have a decent life. So thank you so much for your time throughout this series. I hope that these conversations have given you cause to think about things differently, maybe things you never considered asking about when you first meet someone, that you'll add those now. You'll ask them about their feelings about other people and maybe try to identify biases before they get in the way of a social kind of connection with other people. Talk to your staff too. Remind them that it's okay to have those long-standing human feelings about things, but that at a time when you're looking at a resident who's pushing your buttons, you got to remember that you're the professional and you can't indulge those childhood emotions. You can't do that. And if you can't keep that under control, if you can't be in charge of your own emotional intelligence, you need to talk to your team members about that, because they need to make sure that they're always observant of when you might be crossing a line. There's a fine line between being too casual, with someone and remaining that professional. So how you respond is often going to dictate how these people respond. The environments that you create are to a great extent going to dictate how people react to what's going on around them. So again, thank you so much for your time and attention. I hope that you understand how valuable you are to people and that you never lose sight of the fact that without you, most of these people would not have any sense of quality in their lives at all. So thank you so much, and I hope that we get to cross paths again someday.